Hi, I'm Marcus, 38 pediatric trauma nurse in Chicago, and a solo dad to the best kid on earth. My wife died in a car crash when our daughter Lila was 2. Since then, it's been just me and her against the world. And somehow we were doing all right, morning pancakes, Taylor Swift dance breaks, bedtime science facts, normal chaotic healing life. That is until Thanksgiving, when my parents decided to go full bigot at the dinner table and blew our whole family apart with one sentence and a slap. This is the story of what happened next and why the whole damn country heard about it. I hadn't seen my parents in over a year. Not for lack of trying on their part. They'd been texting sporadically like I was a flaky ex, and they couldn't quite decide if they missed me or were just bored. The last time we spoke, my mum told me she was struggling to recognize the son she raised because apparently raising a biracial daughter means I've joined some underground culture cult that burns casseroles and respects boundaries. Now, before you assume I'm exaggerating, which I am, but only slightly, let me set the tone. My parents are the sort of people who say I'm not racist, and then follow it up with something so unhinged it makes Piers Morgan look woke. They're not overtly horrible, no. That would be far too self-aware. They're what I like to call passive-aggressive relics of beige suburbia. They'll offer you tea and then whisper slurs into the sugar bowl. So when they invited me and my daughter, Lila, over for Thanksgiving with the usual guilt-drenched, "We miss you both terribly, and we just want to reconnect as a family," I did what every emotionally exhausted adult does at some point in their life. I lied to myself. I told myself maybe they'd changed, maybe a year of not being allowed near their granddaughter would have taught them something about decency, or humanity, or at the very least public relations. Spoiler alert, it hadn't. But back then I was still living under the delusion that people grow, that healing was possible, that families, despite their history of microaggressions and casual emotional terrorism, could eventually get it together in time for a vaguely tolerable dinner. So like a moron in a budget rom-com with zero chemistry and a suspiciously American turkey, I packed Lila into the car, told her to be polite, and drove us to the Lion's Den, or as my parents call it, the home that love built but casual racism decorated. I should have known we were doomed the second we pulled into their perfectly trimmed driveway, and my dad opened the door wearing his All Lives Matter apron, the irony of which was apparently completely lost on him. My mum stood behind him with that tight-lipped smile people wear when they've just disinfected the furniture and are praying your child doesn't touch anything. Now Lila, bless her defiant little soul, came armed with optimism and a handmade card sheet. They'd drawn 3 turkeys, one for each of us. Mine had a stethoscope, hers had pink glitter. My dad's had well feathers. I guess she handed it over with all the sincerity of a child who still believed adults had functioning moral compasses. My mum took one look, muttered something about it being very colorful, and slapped it onto the fridge like it was a war crime. Still, I smiled like an idiot because I was trying to be the adult, the peacekeeper, the bridge between 2 wildly different worlds who never asked to be bridged, but now expected me to carry the weight of their dysfunction. In one hand and a side of mashed potatoes in the other. And that, dear listener, is the calm before the cranberry sauce. The bit in the horror film where everything's still too quiet. The part where you think, maybe we'll get through this without bloodshed, completely ignoring the fact that you're sitting on a powder keg built out of generational trauma, unspoken resentment, and a tablecloth that probably cost more than your mental health budget this month. But I digress. That day I chose to hope. And hope, as it turns out, is just denial in a party hat. The moment we walked in the door, I knew we were in trouble, not danger. More the spiritual variety, the kind where your ancestors wince. And the air starts smelling faintly of resentment and overcooked Brussels sprouts. Dad opened the door like he'd been practicing in the mirror for a week. He gave Lila one of those bizarre squint smiles people use when they're trying to appear warm but are genuinely allergic to joy. It was somewhere between a grimace and a small stroke. His whole face looked like it was trying to hold in a racist comment and losing. Mom floated in behind him wearing Pearl's perfume and the kind of smile that only comes from years of silent disappointment. She kissed my cheek like I'd just been released on bail. I half expected her to say welcome home from the institution, which would have been ironic considering the real institution was right there serving lukewarm cider. Now Lila, God bless her naive little heart, had brought another card, because of course she had. That child still believed in thank yous and second chances and the idea that adults could behave like people instead of walking cautionary tales in polyester. She handed it over with both hands like it was the Mona Lisa. It had glitter, it had stickers. It had her actual thumbprint in the shape of a heart. Mom stared at it like it had insulted her potpourri. "Oh," she said, That was the first red flag. The second was the pause. And then she added with the sort of tight-lipped tone that could curdle milk, "Isn't that colorful?" Which to the untrained ear might sound like a compliment, but to anyone who grew up under the reign of passive-aggressive queen, mother, it was code for "this child is too loud, too black, and her crayon choices have personally offended me." And still I smiled. Like a moron, like a bloody hopeful Disney dad who thinks maybe this time the curse will lift and everyone will start singing in unison. Because apparently trauma has a sense of humor, and it chose me as the punchline. The house hadn't changed. Same beige carpet, same live laugh love, signs threatening emotional violence from every surface, same depressing smell of roasted bird and broken dreams. And in the middle of it all, the casserole. The same bloody, side-eye casserole she's been making since I was 6. Cream of mushroom. 4 decades of mediocrity, sprinkled with judgment and one crushed Ritz cracker too many. I'm not saying it's cursed, but if my childhood had a flavor, it'd be that. Anyway, we sat down, I made Lila a plate. She picked at it like it was a science experiment. Dad started a story about how things used to be simpler, and I could feel my soul trying to climb out through my tear ducts. Every conversation was a minefield. Every joke had an edge. Every compliment was a subtle insult dressed in cardigan and pearls. At one point, Mom asked Lila if she still listens to all that urban music, and I swear I had an out-of-body experience. Urban, as in we mean black, but we're cowards about it. Urban. Like this is 2003 and she thinks Missy Elliott is still the peak of counterculture. And through it all I kept doing that thing where you smile so hard your molars start sweating, because I wanted peace just one day. One blinking day of quiet, of no scenes, of no emotional explosions. Silly me. I should have left the second that colorful card comment came out of her mouth. I should have stood up, taken the glitter turkey, and marched my daughter back to the car like a rational adult with a spine. But no, I stayed because family, because tradition, because apparently I thought this was salvageable. What I didn't realize then was that the casserole wasn't the only thing about to curdle. Dinner was already circling the emotional drain before the stuffing even made it to the table. You know that moment at a family gathering when everything is just slightly too quiet, and you can practically hear the tension marinating under the gravy boat? Well, we were deep in it. That special purgatory where passive aggression is served hotter than the turkey and everyone's pretending they haven't fantasized about burning the house down at least once. Lila was doing her best saint in training act. She'd finished half her plate, arranged her cutlery like a tiny royal, and was now eyeing the coffee table where a toy train sat in all its plastic glory. One of those expensive battery-powered ones with sounds and tiny human figures who all look like they pay council tax. Now here's the thing. That train was not hers. Technically, it was a gift from my parents to their other grandchild, the golden one, the heir to the mediocre casserole dynasty, a boy named Noah who somehow managed to radiate both smugness and yogurt breath in equal measure. But of course Lila picked it up gently, like a child who genuinely thought sharing was still a thing humans did. Noah did not agree. In the blink of a passive-aggressive eye, he launched himself across the rug like a pint-sized assassin, and a full-blown tug-of-war began. It wasn't dramatic, not at first. Just 2 kids squabbling over a toy like children have done since the dawn of time and television. And then, cue the villain entrance. My mum stormed into the room like she'd just caught someone vandalizing the queen's face with a crayon. She didn't ask, she didn't mediate. She didn't even breathe properly. She just yanked the train out of Lila's hands like it owed her money and snapped, "You ungrateful black kid. You don't touch what's not yours." Then she slapped her. Let me say that again for the people in the emotional cheap seats. She slapped my 9-year-old child across the face in front of a room full of witnesses over a toy train. And for a moment, everything just stopped. Even the weird Bing Crosby Christmas playlist in the background had the decency to go silent. No one breathed. No one moved. The turkey looked uncomfortable. I froze somewhere between disbelief and actual homicide. I was staring at my own mother, the woman who raised me on homemade rice pudding, and cryptic emotional guilt standing over my daughter like some deranged headmistress of misplaced rage. And Lila, God bless this small, magnificent human being. She didn't cry. She didn't flinch. She looked my mother dead in the eye and said in the calmest, most spine-chilling whisper I have ever heard in my life, "I'll remember this." Like she was casually bookmarking it for future revenge. Like she was filing it under enemies to annihilate in the journal. she keeps beneath her glitter pens. Like she had already mentally added my mother to the list of people she'd ghost harder than her maths homework. And do you know what I did? I stood there, frozen, because the kind of rage I felt wasn't even loud, it was silent. A full body shutdown. The sort of fury where your vision narrows and your internal organs start doing jazz hands out of sheer panic. Everyone else pretended they didn't see it. Noah went back to chewing on a turkey leg like he hadn't just watched a hate crime. Mom stood there smug as anything, as if slapping a child was part of the holiday program. My dad muttered something about discipline under his breath. And the worst part, the absolute worst part, was that nobody said a word. And that's when it hit me. We weren't guests in this house. We were targets. And my daughter, my bright, whip-smart kind little girl who makes thank you cards and believes in fair play, had just been assaulted by her own grandmother because she had the audacity to exist and be brown and touch the wrong toy. The slap was bad, but the silence that followed, that was the real violence. There comes a point in every traumatic family gathering where your soul quietly stands up and says, nope, I'm done. And for me, that moment came right after the slap, right after the silence, and right after I made prolonged eye contact with a plate of congealed cranberry jelly and realized it had more emotional range than half my family. I didn't make a speech. I didn't shout. I didn't throw the gravy boat across the room in a fit of theatrical release. Even though God knows I wanted to, I just stood up, calmly grabbed my daughter her coat and the last slice of pumpkin pie. Because yes, I am that petty, and yes, if I'm going to walk out of this house in emotional ruin, I'm taking dessert with me. The pie was still warm, which felt like a tiny act of cosmic kindness in the middle of this hellish sitcom. And honestly, if I didn't have a 9-year-old to protect, I might have just eaten it with my bare hands in the front garden while screaming into the hedge. We walked towards the door. My mother, bless her tone-deaf heart, decided that was the moment to find her voice. She shrieked, "You are being disrespectful," as if slapping a child and hurling racial slurs was just good old-fashioned parenting. Apparently, the real crime was leaving the dinner table before pudding. My dad, oh sweet enabler of doom, muttered, "You should have known better than to bring her here," which I assume was meant to sound wise or tragic or something, but mostly it just sounded like the ghost of a man whose spine left the chat decades ago. And I, in that moment, came dangerously close to saying something that would have cost me my nursing license and possibly earned me a spot on the 6 o'clock news. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from sheer white-knuckled fury, the kind that starts behind your eyes and spreads down your spine like molten rage. Sponsored by generational trauma and unsupervised casseroles. But then, just as I was about to turn around and let loose every suppressed syllable I've swallowed since 1997, Lila, my daughter, the tiny human who had just been slapped by her own grandmother for existing in a skin tone that didn't match the dining room curtains, squeezed my hand and said, "It's okay, Daddy, I have a plan." Now, let me tell you, when a 9-year-old says that, you listen. You shut your broken, furious adult mouth and you listen, because any child who can take a slap smile like the Mona Lisa and then calmly announce she's plotting something deserves your immediate and unquestioning support. Also possibly legal representation, but we'll cross that bridge later. So I walked out the door, down the steps, out of that mausoleum of emotional dysfunction, with one hand holding my daughter and the other holding that glorious slice of stolen pie. And I didn't look back, not even when Mum called my name, not even when the front door slammed with the passive aggression of a Jane Austen character denied a second glass of sherry. We didn't speak in the car. We just drove, me and my glitter-soaked revolutionary, until we were far enough away for my lungs to work again, until the smell of burned expectations and overly salted stuffing faded into the rearview mirror. I don't remember what song was on the radio, but I remember the sound of Lila opening the pie box in the back seat, taking a fork, and saying, "Do you want the first bite or shall I begin the revolution?" 3 days later, I got home from a double shift at the hospital. You know, the kind where you spend 14 hours elbow deep in bodily fluids and existential dread only to come home and discover your child has accidentally triggered a national media event. I walked through the front door exhausted emotionally, hollow and smelling vaguely of antiseptic and stress, hoping for nothing more than a shower and maybe a biscuit instead. I walked in on Lila sitting at the kitchen table, wearing her sparkly headphones and chatting on Zoom like she was closing a merger, And not just with her school friends, no. With a woman. In a blazer, with a Channel 6 News logo in the background. Now, there are a few things you don't expect to hear when you walk in after a trauma shift. One of them is, "So Lila, can you walk us through the moment your grandmother slapped you and called you an ungrateful black child?" I dropped my bag, tried to process, failed, and just sort of hovered there blinking like I'd been hit in the face with a particularly emotional aubergine. Lila saw me, gave me a thumbs up, and kept talking, because of course she did. Apparently, she'd entered an anti-bullying video competition at school. Didn't tell me because according to her I was too tired and would have made it boring. So she made it herself. Edited on the school iPad. Titles. Music. She even used captions. And instead of using a nice, safe fictional scenario about mean girls and stolen pencil cases, she went full investigative journalist on Thanksgiving dinner. Names redacted, obviously. She's not reckless. But the story? The story was all there. A little girl at a family gathering. Insulted. Hit. Because of the color of her skin. And she didn't cry. She didn't shout. She just calmly explained how it made her feel. It went viral. And I don't mean, oh, how cute viral. I mean national headlines. Millions of views. Thousands of shares. A slow news week in one. Dangerously articulate 9-year-old turned my personal family meltdown into a televised morality lesson. People were pissed. Properly. Outraged. Schools were screening it during assembly. Teachers were crying in the comments. One woman said she showed it to her son, and he hugged his sister for the first time in 6 years. Another said it made her divorce her racist husband. Brands were reposting it with captions like, "This is why we need to listen to children." Even the local MP shared it with a clapping emoji and a paragraph about equality. Meanwhile, I was standing in the hallway, still holding my badge, wondering when exactly my daughter became a tiny revolutionary in pigtails. The reporter ended the call with, "We'd love to do a follow-up interview with your dad if he's available." To which Lila said, "He's very busy, but I'll check his calendar." Then she turned to me, smiled, and said, "You're welcome." And honestly, I didn't even know what to say, because on one hand, yes, I was mortified. I had not emotionally budgeted for becoming the unwilling face of generational trauma this week. But on the other hand, my daughter had used her voice, her truth, and a cracked school tablet to start a conversation people couldn't ignore. And that was something worth losing a bit of peace and quiet over. You know how sometimes the universe just tilts like someone bumped the emotional Jenga tower and suddenly the people who swore they were the victims last week are now showing up with cupcakes and rehearsed remorse. Well, welcome to Act 6 of this tragic comedy starring my parents and their brand, new crisis management strategy. It was a Thursday, rainy. Of course it was, I was halfway through reheating leftover stir-fry and explaining to Lila that no, you can't train the cat to respond to Latin when the doorbell rang. Now we don't get visitors. We're not visitor people. So my first thought was that Amazon had started offering passive-aggressive home delivery service. I opened the door, and there they are, my parents, standing on my porch like they're auditioning for The Sound of Manipulation, Mom in full makeup and pearls, Dad holding a plant. Yes, a bloody plant. Because nothing says I'm sorry. I hit your child like a potted hydrangea and stale supermarket biscuits. Mom smiled. That brittle, shiny kind of smile that looks like it was glued on by a nervous intern, and said, "We had no idea she felt that way. Can't she take a joke?" Now, let me pause here so you can absorb that. Can't she take a joke? As in, being slapped across the face and called ungrateful for breathing while brown was apparently their idea of bants. My dad, God bless his eternal mediocrity, chimed in with, "It's just gone a bit too far now, hasn't it?" All over the internet, Marcus. Like the real issue was bad press and not the fact that his granddaughter now flinches when someone raises their voice near her juice box. I laughed. Like properly. From the gut, that exhausted laugh you do when the world stops making sense and you're clinging to your dignity. With a coat hanger and prayer, I said, "You slapped her. But sure, let's talk about the internet." And oh, the shift? Mom blinked like I'd just recited Shakespeare backwards. Dad did that awkward throat-clearing thing he always does when someone reminds Him actions have consequences. They started with the classics. We didn't mean it. It came out wrong. We were raised differently. Ah, yes, the holy trinity of non-apologies, followed shortly by, we're just worried about the family's reputation, which loosely translates to, your daughter's honesty is a branding problem. I invited them in, briefly, because I believe in closure, and also because I needed them to see the video playing on our telly, Lila's video subtitled broadcast, streaming, and I let them watch the whole thing. The calm voice, the brutal honesty, the tiny hand movements, the bit where she looks into the camera and says, I don't think love should hurt. Mom started crying, which would have been touching if I believed it wasn't entirely for her dad. Stared at the floor like it owed him money, and I just stood there, arms crossed, thinking, this is what accountability looks like, and it's deeply uncomfortable, isn't it? They left shortly after. No big dramatic scene. No storming out. Just a quiet walk to the car with wilted biscuits and slightly less certainty about their moral high ground. And I didn't feel better, but I did feel done. And that was something. So you'd think, after the slap, after the video, after the tears and the hydrangea, that my parents might finally read the emotional room, that they'd come to terms with their behavior, maybe even brace yourselves, apologize, like sentient adults with a basic understanding of cause and effect. No, of course not. This is my family, not a Netflix redemption arc. They came round again, uninvited again, because boundaries are apparently optional when you've got matching retirement windbreakers and an ego the size of Surrey. Mom sat on my sofa like she owned it, which was hilarious considering I bought it after cutting back on therapy to afford a decent backrest. Dad stood by the window looking like a man hoping the neighbors don't notice. His reputation is circling the drain with the leftover casserole. Then Mom, in all her powdered glory, looked at Lila, my child, the same one she slapped, and said, I think it would mean a lot if you apologize, sweetheart. You know, for exaggerating and making things look worse than they were. I had to genuinely check if I was awake. Like maybe I was mid-nap in a break, room hallucinating, my way through unresolved trauma and discount cookies. But no, she meant it. Dead serious. Eyes wide like she was the victim in a Haribo-sponsored Greek tragedy. My daughter, bless her restraint, didn't say a word, just sipped her juice like she was waiting for the adults to finish, embarrassing themselves, so I, ever the proud, emotionally wilted parent, pulled out my phone, opened my inbox, and began scrolling. Here's an email from a Year 6 teacher in Leeds saying, Lila's video made half the staff room cry. Here's one from a mother who said her son finally admitted he was being bullied because Lila gave him the words to explain it. Oh, and this one's from a congresswoman from Michigan, yes, America, who called Lila's words courageous, vulnerable, and necessary. Would you like me to print them out, Mom, or tattoo them on a biscuit so they go down easier? They blinked, like actual blinking, as if the screen was lying and I'd personally deep-faked a politician to soothe my parenting choices, and then I said it. Plain, sharp. No sarcasm left because even I have a limit. You embarrassed yourselves, she just told the truth. Silence. You could hear the sound of their worldview, collapsing under the weight of unwashed denial. Dad tried to mumble something, but I cut him off with a look, so cold it made the plant from last week drop a leaf. Then I stood up, walked to the door, held it open like a hotel concierge about to lose his last ounce of will to live, and said, time to go and take your store-bought cookies with you. They were dry anyway. Mom gasped, as if that was the real offense. Not the slapping, not the racism, not the failed PR stunt disguised as a peace visit, but the biscuit critique. They left. Eventually, and I swear as I closed the door behind them, Lila looked up from her juice box, raised an eyebrow, and said, do you think they even like pumpkin spice, or is it just a white people thing? Honestly, that child deserves a medal. Or a sitcom. The next week we boarded a plane to Washington, D.C., because apparently, when your 9-year-old accidentally becomes the face of dignity, justice, and glitter-scented rage, people notice. Big people, important people, the kind who wear lanyards unironically, and say things like, we'll circle back. With a straight face, Lila had been invited to speak at a national Youth Summit on Racial Justice and Bullying. You know, casual, like it's just a normal Wednesday, and not the kind of thing that makes grown men weep into their travel neck pillows. I was still recovering from the emotional whiplash of it all. One week I'm trying to keep her away from racist relatives and questionably baked biscuits. The next, she's packing for a public speaking gig while reminding me to bring lip balm because she can't have you looking crusty on TV, Daddy. The summit was held in this cavernous, marble-floored building that smelled like ambition and filtered coffee. There were kids from all over the country, smart ones, loud ones, shy ones, and at least one future politician who tried to network with a tray of cheese cubes. And then there was Lila. She walked on stage like she'd done it 1,000 times, wearing her mum's old scarf, the one with the faded blue pattern that used to smell like lavender and long car rides. She held my hand until the last second, then let go like it was nothing. The spotlight hit her, and for a brief moment my heart actually stopped. Because there she was, my daughter, all of 9 years old, looking like she was about to take Parliament by storm. And then she spoke. Calm, clear, every word stitched with sincerity and tiny bits of chaos wisdom only a child of grief and glitter can pull off. She said, "You don't have to be nice to people who are cruel just because they're family. Love isn't supposed to hurt. And let me tell you," I sobbed. In public. Twice. Once during the speech, once during the standing ovation, and again in the airport bathroom like a Victorian widow clutching a damp cravat. I didn't even care. There I was, a 6'2" trauma nurse who stitched up stab wounds without blinking, reduced to tears by a child in sparkly boots and a borrowed scarf, because she'd done what generations before her never could. She told the truth, in front of everyone, with no shame, no filter, no fear. And the crowd, they lost it. Teachers were weeping. Teenagers were nodding. A woman behind me muttered, "That girl's going to save the world." And I had to physically stop myself from turning around and saying, "She already saved mine." Afterwards, she came off stage, calm as anything, and said, "Do we have time for ice cream, or do I need to sign autographs first?" I laughed so hard I nearly choked on my emotions, because of course, she's still 9, still cheeky, still wants sprinkles and full control of the music in the car, but she's also so much more. Not because she went viral, not because she gave a speech, but because she understood something most adults can't even say out loud. That family isn't sacred if it wounds you, that love doesn't excuse cruelty, and that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stand up, speak out, and then ask for dessert. So here's a plot twist so mild it could be served at a pensioner's luncheon. We haven't heard a peep from my parents since. No Christmas card, no birthday text, no accidental Facebook like from my mom at 2 a.m., followed by a cryptic message that says, "Hope you're well, X." Nothing. Radio silence. And you know what? It's been glorious. At first I thought I'd feel guilty. You know, the usual internal monologue of, "But they're your parents." As if biology is some kind of magical reset button for generational trauma. But turns out, once you remove the passive aggression, the judgment, and the side-eye casserole from your life, the air literally feels lighter. Like we sage the house, but emotionally, our holidays look different now. We do Friendsgiving, surrounded by people who don't flinch at glitter cards or call my child colorful like it's a threat. We wear matching pajamas in November because we're cheesy and free now. And yes, Lila gets 2 desserts just for existing. No one has to earn their seat at the table. No one gets slapped for touching a toy. And the turkey isn't served with a side of thinly veiled bigotry and post-war parenting techniques. Lila's thriving. Properly thriving. She's on student council now, and which, by the way, is mostly her telling the head teacher why the vending machine snacks are classist. But still, she helps younger girls at school with confidence workshops. Little ones who look up to her like she's some kind of sparkly justice wizard in Skechers. She journals. She dances. She's healing. And me? Well, I finally did the most emotionally millennial thing a British man can do besides buying throw pillows with inspirational quotes. I went to therapy, and not the I went once and pretended I was fine kind. No, I committed. Turns out you can spend your life patching up other people and still walk around full of holes. Who knew? I learned that just because I survived my childhood doesn't mean I need to recreate it in my parenting. That boundaries aren't rude. That loving someone doesn't mean tolerating their nonsense until your nervous system packs up and moves to Belgium. And crucially, that crying in public 3 times in 1 week doesn't make me weak. It just makes me a man with tear ducts and a particularly emotional child. So yeah, the family fallout was loud, messy, and permanently scorched our family WhatsApp chat. But what came after? That's peace. That's progress. That's matching pajamas and second desserts and dance parties in the kitchen where no one flinches. It's not perfect, but it's ours. So here we are, the end of the tale, the moral of the madness, the emotional credits, if you will, minus the budget, soundtrack, or neatly resolved sibling arc. And what have I learned? Well, first off, and I say this with all the love, sarcasm, and lightly roasted trauma I can muster, family is not blood. No, family is not the people who share your DNA, bake emotional manipulation into their biscuits, and then call it just how we were raised. Family is who shows up, who listens, who holds your kid's hand and says, "You don't deserve that." And when the world, or your mother, tries to convince her otherwise. Family is the maid who drops off lasagna when you're too sad to boil pasta, the teacher who pulls Lila aside to say she's proud, the woman in the airport queue who saw us crying near the pretzel kiosk and quietly handed us a tissue and a wink. That is family. And Lila? Lila isn't ungrateful. She's not difficult. She's not dramatic. She's bold. She's brilliant. She's blindingly brave in a world that still pretends politeness is more important than justice, that children should stay quiet while adults throw emotional tantrums in matching cardigans. She stood up, spoke out, and then asked for ice cream. Honestly, I'd vote for her. As for me, I used to think being grateful meant accepting what you're given, even if what you're given is dipped in disappointment and labeled tradition. But it doesn't. Gratitude shouldn't come at the cost of dignity. It doesn't mean biting your tongue while someone slices away at your spirit with a smile. And if being grateful means tolerating abuse from the people who made me, then no thank you. We'll pass. We're building our own legacy now. No family crest. No ancestral casserole. Just messy, beautiful, fiercely honest living. We've got our own traditions now. Pie and protest and public speeches. Board games that don't end in screaming. Pajamas that match but don't itch. Laughing so hard we forget to be afraid. And crying without shame when the day's been too long. Because the truth is, the world's still messy. People are still ridiculous. Racism still exists. But so do we. And we've got glitter cards, homemade signs, and a voice louder than our fear. So that's the story. Thanks for listening, or crying, or rage laughing in your car. Whatever works, we're doing all right. One slice of pie at a time.